It was our first pregnancy, and Colin and I were excited to go to our first 12-week scan. But the scan didn't go as planned. We couldn't find a heartbeat, our baby wasn't alive, and I would inevitably miscarry. Our baby had stopped growing at 8 weeks. It was a very bitter pill to swallow. A week later, I miscarried naturally. After hours of contractions, I passed an effusive amount of blood, all sorts of tissues, and the sac with my little baby too. We called him Andrew. 6 months later, we were pregnant again. And I really wanted to be pregnant, but at the same time, I was really scared. So I booked a 6, 8, and 10-week scan. At the 6-week scan, just about 22 days after conception, I heard our second son's heartbeat. Hearing that beautiful noise was confirmation enough that our Harvey was alive. The pregnancy continued as normal. At 7 months, we had what would have been our final scan. Ironically, it was the only scan I wasn't anxious about, because I had felt Harvey move so energetically in my womb from about 22 weeks. I lay there as the sonographer carried out what I thought were her usual 30-week checks. Then she turned to me and said, "Your baby seems to be too small for his age." She explained that there was resistance in the blood flow to Harvey in my placenta. I have tried to go back to that moment in my memory, but most of it is a blur. I do remember a few things, though. I remember feeling physically sick at hearing the news. I remember feeling terrified. I'm not a biologist, but I knew that restricting blood flow to a baby was never a good thing. I remember researching science journals at night and reading the list of potential complications, which included development delays, brain damage, and stillbirths. The list was so painful, I literally had to stop reading. I remember crying to the midwife and asking her if my baby was going to be okay. And she turned to me and said, "I cannot guarantee that to you or to any other person who walks into our ward." I remember being injected with steroids to catalyze Harvey's lung development. 2 days later, I was admitted into the specialist hospital in Cádiz. Our routine was the same every day. At night, I would fast, and in the morning, prep for surgery. The doctor would scan me to assess the level of blood flow to different parts of Harvey. The doctor would check the flow because my body was completely unaware of the dangers posed to the life inside. So it was up to the doctor to decide when the risks of keeping him inside outweighed the benefits. The daily scans lasted for more than 30 minutes, so we saw Harvey get up to all kinds of mischief. We saw him yawn, we saw him rest his hand beside his ear, we saw him with hiccups, we saw him practice breathing, we saw que era un nervio, and he still is. 10 days after being admitted to the specialist hospital, I walked into the doctor's clinic, and after his in-depth scan, he said, "Hoy es tu día." How I would love to say that the day Harvey was born was the best day of my life. It was categorically the worst day. I wouldn't say I gave birth to him because, frankly, I had never planned to deliver him 2 months early. Unlike when I miscarried with Andrew, I didn't have one contraction, my waters never broke. I could have walked myself onto the surgical table. I lay there on the table in fear because I didn't know what a 7-month human fetus looked like. I didn't know if he would seem alien to me. I didn't know if he would be able to survive outside the womb so premature. I didn't even know if to expect him to cry. A few minutes into the C-section, Harvey was literally brought into the outside world, and he cried. His lungs filled with oxygen, and he cried. The pediatrician brought him to me, and he didn't look alien. He looked like one of us, because he was one of us. A skinny 3-pound one of us, but one of us nonetheless. This is Harvey, just 10 minutes after being born. One could say this is a video of an unviable child. He was unable to regulate his own body temperature, unable to breathe fully on his own, unable to coordinate his breathing and sucking, to the point that he had to be fed via a feeding tube. However, no one can deny that this is also a video of a living human being. From that moment on, I plummeted into a world I knew very little about. A world I have dubbed the preemie experience. This world has been both traumatic and an absolute privilege. That same day, I received floods on congratulations on being a mother. I found it an odd thing to say to me. Firstly, I couldn't see much success in my situation. I didn't want to have Harvey at 7 months. Harvey was receiving all kinds of treatments, and I didn't know if he would be okay. Secondly, I didn't feel that Harvey's birth made me a mom. Harvey had been my child already for 7 months, and I, his mother. The only thing that had changed from pre-C-section to post-C-section was his geographical location. He was relocated from the natural womb to a clinical womb in the form of an incubator. Another day, I remember crying to the nurse because my baby was sick. And she turned to me and said, "Your son is not sick. He is doing exactly what someone his age should be doing. He isn't supposed to be able to feed from a bottle. That's like asking a newborn baby to walk." That comment changed my perspective. I actually found myself staring at Harvey in awe and watching the miracle of the early development of the human species unfold before my eyes. Indeed, in many ways, I was honored to have a front row seat. I met countless other premature babies or preemies and their parents. There was Riley, born at 34 weeks, twins Leon and Owen at 27, Ryan at 26 weeks, Harley Faith at 24, and I was told about Amelia, born at 21 weeks. If you've ever met a preemie parent, you'll find that they all refer to their children as fighters. But how can it be that every premature baby is a fighter? I have come to the conclusion that to be a fighter is to be human and alive. It must be that the instinct to survive is one of our most primitive ones. After all, these preemies are one of us. During those 7 weeks with Harvey at the hospital, I must have seen dozens of premature babies fight to survive. And in the background to all of this was the abortion debate in Gibraltar. I actually watched the GBC debate on my hospital bed. I found the notion of purposely terminating the lives of unborn children perplexing. And during those countless hours in the hospital, I tried to make sense of it all. It was so clear to me that the life inside the womb was a human life, and so it's bizarre that we do not give the person in the womb, who is one of us, the same rights to life afforded to the rest of us. Looking at the science, we know that the fetus is a human one, because he or she would have had human parents. Therefore, by definition, the being in the womb is a human being. We also know if the child is alive, we can hear their heartbeat, we can measure their growth. So, my question to you is, who gets human rights? Isn't the necessary criteria simply to be human? In the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it states all members of the human family have the right to life. Accordingly, you just need to be human to get that right. Therefore, doesn't it follow that the human child in the womb, who we know to be a living human being, should also enjoy those same rights? As someone who believes in equality, I think it's only right and fair to extend the right to life to the human child in the womb as well. From this basis, I cannot justify the aborting, the terminating, the deliberate destruction, whatever you want to call it, of the unborn child, of one of us. In carrying out an abortion, we are denying these humans one of their fundamental rights, their right to life. Another UN document I want to share with you is the Declaration of Rights of the Child, where it states that the child, by reason of his physical and mental immaturity, needs special safeguards and care, including appropriate legal protection before as well as after birth. Note the before. But during the abortion debate, individuals who supported the pro-choice campaign took various stances on the point or circumstance at which we should recognize and protect the human life in the womb. For me, I looked at the science, and that's why I'm pro-life. Any embryologist, doctor, biologist, or human scientist will confirm that human life starts at conception. I know few try to contest this, but it can be likened to Trump denying global warming despite all the science and all the evidence. However, the pro-choice argument tries to find another start line, different and later to what science tells us. I see this as a very dangerous game to play. My question to you is, where do we draw the line? Do we draw the line at Riley? At the twins? At Ryan? At Harley Faith? At Amelia? At Andrew? Bear in mind, everyone in this room was here when your life started. It is usually argued that this start line should be based on a certain age or development stage, despite the fact that the Declaration of Human Rights states no such conditions. However, some say we should respect human life when it's viable. I say, why? If I become unviable, maybe I need help breathing. Would it be okay to end my life then? No. Some say we should respect human life when they are sentient, when they can perceive their environment and feel emotions such as pain. I say, why? If I become insentient, maybe I have a car accident and I'm temporarily unconscious. Would it be okay to end my life then? No. But most importantly, if you look at the science, there's actually no evidence that the human fetus lacks awareness. This is why it is standard procedure to anesthetize a fetus during open fetal procedures. Some say we should respect human life when it's free of disabilities. I say, why? Why is it that an unborn child with a disability is worth less than an unborn child who doesn't have one? What message are we sending our friends and family who have disabilities? Do you see the inequality? Most worryingly, do you see how a human child in the womb could have no right to life if the mother chooses so? However, a newborn child or an unborn child just 1 day older could actually be protected by law and have human rights. Do you see the inequality here based purely on being a certain age or being a certain way? This flies in the face of human rights doctrine. That being said, I'm not blinded to the fact that there are crisis pregnancies where women feel they have no other option but to abort their children, their unborn child. And believe me, I get it. I get why women in some circumstances consider abortions. Situations of pregnant women in abusive relationships or on the poverty line, teen pregnancies or pregnancies from rape, all very painful and scary situations. But let me ask you this. Is it fair, even in these circumstances, to give an innocent child the death penalty? When women abort their children because they feel they have no other option, I say shame on us. Shame on us for not being there for these women and their children. We fail as a supportive and cohesive society when women in desperate situations terminate the lives of their unborn children for socio-economic reasons. She is one of us, and her child is one of us. I see the pregnant mother in that abusive relationship, and I see the relationship, the abusive relationship, as the problem, not the child. So where were we? Where were we when this mother started showing signs of being in an abusive relationship? Where was our community when this mother needed a safe and appropriate shelter for her and her child? Where was the financial and emotional support she needed to bring her beautiful baby into the world? In the same way that I do not think abortion is a solution, I do not think only banning an abortion is the solution either. We have a lot to do in Gibraltar. Gibraltar, with its long history of record-high budget surpluses, is uniquely positioned to reduce the amount of and support women through and after crisis pregnancies, from providing full education on women's fertility window and contraceptive options, to providing housing, financial and emotional support to a mother in a crisis. During the debate, "It's my body and it's my choice" sounded empowering. Others said, "I wouldn't have an abortion myself, but I believe women should have the choice." And as a woman, I was almost inclined to agree. But when I really thought about it, I realized these concepts were fundamentally flawed. Choice of what? You see, when my choice harms another person, that's not okay. When my choice rids another person of their fundamental human rights, that's not okay. I cannot choose to drink and drive because I can ruin someone else's life. I cannot choose not to put my son's seatbelt on because he would hurt himself if I didn't. In fact, I cannot even choose to play music past 11 p.m. So who are we as mothers, anyone to choose if our children have the right to life? At the foundation of an orderly society are laws that protects its people from the choice of others that could cause harm. And in its term, its people, it's only right that we include the most vulnerable of us, the unborn child, small and quiet, but with a heartbeat, just like one of us. The Gibraltar I would like to see is a truly inclusive one which values all persons, including those small persons in the womb. This is a photo of a human being with no rights in some countries. However, in Gibraltar, this child does have the right to life, and I'm proud to say that. After all, he or she is one of us.
Good afternoon. Thank you all very much for having me here in this series of Jib Talks. This is, I think, the event's fifth edition, so many congratulations to Julian, Seamus and the Cultural Services team for putting all this together. I do hope these sessions continue for many years to come. So now on to the small matter of Brexit. I think the subject matter of the talk today will take nobody by surprise. Brexit is something that has rocked Gibraltar to its foundations, and the United Kingdom too, and also the European Union. I intend to look at Brexit in the context of the wider love-hate historical relationship between Britain and Europe, a relationship that was fueled by a different perspective of the world and of the UK's position in it, the demands of a global empire, the trade, military, political links that bound the United Kingdom to a quarter of the planet. The view that the UK was one entity, separate and distinct to the continent that lay across the Channel, still regarded by many there as a strange place where people speak French and German instead of English, where in one country they fight and kill bulls, in another they eat snails, in another they have had 61 governments since the end of World War II, and where all in all they have much to learn from us about democracy. That is, of course, an exaggeration, but it is nonetheless an underlying attitude. So where did it all start? I'll begin with a quote, which was, in effect, a caution or a warning. Unless a clear view is pushed that Britain must lead in Europe, at the very least to achieve the completion of the single market, then the portmanteau for Greek Euro exit might be followed by another word, Brexit. Many of you might not know this, but this was the first time that the word Brexit was published. The date was the 15th of May, 2012, just over 6.5 years ago. It was coined by a gentleman named Peter Wilding, the founder and now managing director of UK-based consultancy, The Influence Group. 6.5 years ago. Today, I almost do not remember what I used to do before the referendum. I cannot recall the last time I went through an entire day without hearing the word Brexit or reading the word Brexit somewhere. And I dread that for the foreseeable future, that word will continue to resonate in every household, in every school, in every office, and in every conversations in Gibraltar. Mr. Wilding may have been the first person to coin this issue, to coin the word Brexit. But whether we like it or not, the word is now inextricably linked and woven into the fabric and the history of our community. However, the reality is that Brexit, as a concept, as a debate, as a perennial question, has existed for many decades. So let us go back one moment to the beginning. What is now Brexit was, at one time, let's call it Brentry. The same fundamentally British concerns over the UK's exit from the European Union expressed today were voiced upon presentation of the European project back in the 1950s. The UK was different to the continent in ideology, in constitutional makeup, in ethos, in attitude, in the way of doing things. Britain, an island, was said to be closer to its kinsmen in Australia and New Zealand on the far side of the world than it was to Europe. Euroscepticism existed even before Britain joined the EU. As far back as 1950, the then Labour Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin, upon contemplating whether there should be a Brentry or not, foresaw this, and I quote, "Once you open that Pandora's box, all sorts of Trojan horses are going to fly out." And he was not mistaken. Eventually, though, the UK decided that it would be best to join what was then the European Economic Community. The UK saw the countries on the continent as economic partners, as opposed to anything else which might imply a closer political or human affinity. So for one reason or another, it was time to join. But the process was not going to be an easy one. 5 of the 6 members of the EEC were ready to embrace a difficult United Kingdom with open arms. France was not. Charles de Gaulle, as you know, the legendary French president who played a pivotal role in the development of the EEC. And it was France that vetoed UK entry into the Continental Club. Not once, but 2 times. First in 1963 and then in 1967. De Gaulle accused the UK of having a deep-seated hostility to the European project. London, he said, had shown a lack of interest in the common market. The United Kingdom, he declared, was incompatible with Europe. He was not wrong. The Iron Lady Margaret Thatcher herself conceded that President de Gaulle had it right all along. She said in Statescraft that de Gaulle did not particularly like Britain, but he understood the British quite well. But for Thatcher, the differences between Britain and the continent run deeper than misconfigurations of economic policy. She was adamant that it was Britain's long history of continuous constitutional development, the respect in which her institutions were held, the honesty of her politicians and the integrity of her judges, the fact that not since a Norman conquest had she known occupation, that neither Nazism nor communism had ever gained grip in her political life. All these things, said Thatcher, marked Britain aside and apart from the continent. Be that as it may, the UK and indeed Gibraltar joined the European communities in 1973. The UK's entry into Europe proved to be as controversial then as its exit is proving to be today. Europe has continued to inform and dominate UK politics since 1972. It has also been a source of division. Indeed, already by 1975, the first UK-wide referendum was held on the United Kingdom's continued membership of the European Community. This was only 3 years after going in. Upon taking power, Harold Wilson promised to firstly renegotiate the terms of membership, and secondly, to put that renegotiation to the people of the UK in a referendum. It all sounds so familiar today. That was the same offer that David Cameron was to repeat in 2016. The result of the 1975 referendum was a landslide. On 64.5% turnout, more than 2/3 of UK voters voted to remain. In the 2016 referendum, as you all know, the outcome was very different. But these are the cards that have been dealt to us. And we all know well what the future, what Brexit could mean for Gibraltar in the future. And we all know the intensity of the ongoing work to ensure the smoothest possible Gib exit. But rather than bore you with those same issues which we've repeated ad nauseum inside out, I want to speak to you today about what Brexit has meant for me personally. Pressure, stress, hard work, patience, resolve, persistence, perseverance, responsibility. I could go on and on, but those are some of the first words that came into my head. There is also no magic recipe. We all know exactly what we're up against. The gauntlet was thrown down very early on. You will recall that within hours of the referendum result being announced, Mr. Margallo, then the Foreign Minister of Spain, said that the Spanish flag on the rock is much closer than ever before. But the Spanish flag remains today exactly where it always was, firmly planted on the other side of the border. And that is where it is going to stay. The other images that come into my head are meetings, flights, nights away from home, nights away from my family, my wife, my children. London, Brussels, Strasbourg, Madrid, Brussels, Strasbourg, London. The meetings have proved incessant, and it has been genuinely and truly quite exhausting. Although curiously, in this day and age, you would not believe how much diplomacy can actually be done by WhatsApp. We call it digital diplomacy, and it helps. You cannot imagine the revolution that can be orchestrated in a matter of seconds, no matter where you happen to be in the world. But I'm afraid you will have to wait for my new book to learn more about that. We have been to so many hundreds of meetings, engagements, and so on, that I'm sure you will forgive me for only once calling in at the wrong address. We are calling in to see an important ambassador from an important EU member state in London. Instead of 27 Princes Gates, or whatever it was, we were taking to 27 Princes Streets. We didn't know at the time. 3 of us were there, Dominic Searle from our London office, Daniel D'Amato from our Brussels office, and myself. I thought it rather odd. There was no flag and there was no security at the door. But having said that, my concerns were allayed somewhat when, on pressing the buzzer to this grand mansion in an affluent part of the city, we were allowed in with virtually no questions asked. In a posh and beautiful hallway, we were greeted by a dog, a small Cocker Spaniel. Thankfully, none of us were afraid of dogs. Eventually, the owner of the dog, wearing a bathrobe, walks down the stairs to meet us. Either she was the ambassador underdressed for the meeting, or certainly she was not the ambassador. On being informed that the Deputy Chief Minister of Gibraltar was there for a meeting with Ambassador X of a member state, she then looked even more bewildered. I thought, she said, you were the guys who are coming to fix a satellite TV. Clearly, we were the ones who were underdressed for the occasion. But needless to say, we apologized, we turned around, and we left, and we managed to get to the real engagement in time. There have been other awkward moments too, plenty of them. But by far the strangest of them all was that time when we were accused of hacking into the European Parliament's IT system. An amendment to a resolution on Brexit concerning Gibraltar had been published and supported by a significant number of MEPs. Not unusual, except that it was published as though it had been introduced as a result of an agreement by the leaders of all the political groups in the European Parliament, including the European Partido Popular, supporting Gibraltar. So imagine their faces. The confusion lasted for about an hour. But still, this was enough to infuriate a particular Spanish MEP who later claimed the following in the press, and I'll quote in Spanish because that's how he said it. Nos dicen que es un error, pero no es verdad. Es una intoxicación y vamos a exigir responsabilidades. Es el juego sucio del lobby gibraltareño o de los británicos, o no sé de quién, pero van a caer cabeza. There was, of course, no sabotage. No one was held responsible and no heads rolled. What the incident does show is the way Gibraltar is perceived by some in Spain. Capable of the worst evil, of the most wicked crimes, including computer hacking, and the implementers of underhand black schemes. These are the myths that we need to bust as we go forward into Brexit, and the misconceptions which are held in Spain that we need to correct. It is not easy. It will take time, but we will get there in the end. Thank you very much for listening.
I must say, I've never been so nervous. Right. It's me. It's me from the beginnings to now, and I'm 70. I certainly wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for that little beastie not exploding. When it was bound for London in late 1944 and had not actually exploded when it fell into a coal bunker next to the flats where my parents lived. They lived in Chalk Farm in Camden in North London. They'd been born in Berlin. My father's family were only able to leave eventually in 1938, when life for German Jews just got too difficult. My mother, who was my father's girlfriend at the time, would only be allowed to leave if she had employment. So my grandfather took her on as their maid, and she was able to leave and travel with them. The Nazis, however, reneged upon their promise of sending her own mother along afterwards, and she was inevitably shipped off to Bergen-Belsen and then to Auschwitz, where her life ended. My parents lived with my grandparents for the first years of their married life, but by very careful management in their tailoring business, my father had 4 brothers, they were able eventually, after the war, to move into a 1-bedroom flat near the grandparents, and my brother, their firstborn, was born in 1942. Shortly after that, they obviously wanted to expand their family once peace came. But it took another 2 years before they were able to find the money and a suitable house. This was the block of flats in Chalk Farm, Camden Town. It still stands today. You can probably buy a 1- or 2-bedroom flat for 800,000, $1 million. Incredible. But in the war years, it was almost squalor. Eventually, when they saved their money, we got this, a lovely 4-bedroom house, which had been rebuilt, a new build, out of a bomb site. But they had built it in 1930s style, and it looked just like the house next door. That one is still standing today, with a beautiful big back garden. I must say that I had an absolutely wonderful life, all thanks to my mother, who was determined that their children would never suffer as she had done. She lost her father as a baby and her mother to the Holocaust. Now, I had a very vivid imagination, and I was dancing and singing from a very young age. And although I was painfully shy, I was fairly bright, particularly at maths. Don't ever ask me to write a story, though. That certainly was my downfall when I managed to write 3 lines of an essay in my 11+ exam. Needless to say, I failed. So where was I to go to secondary school? That was when Ada Foster Stage School came into play. I spent a very enlightening next 4 years, which taught me my craft, and certainly put paid to the shyness that I had suffered from earlier on in my life. During these years, I made 2 appearances on television, Jimmy Logan Show, Charlie Drake Show, TV adverts, several modelling jobs. And I was even lucky enough to meet Princess Margaret. If you ask me later, I'll tell you what she was like. I also appeared in 2 Christmas pantomimes at the London Palladium, the first in '61 with Norman Wisdom, horrible man, and the second in '62 and '63 with Frankie Vaughan. Lovely man. Pantomimes lasted 6 weeks over Christmas and New Year, and we'd have our schoolwork in the morning, travelling to the theatre and doing homework during the performances in the evening. It was during this last show, though, that I learned the more difficult side of theatre. I realised, I must show you, however, if I can. Are you going? Oh, that's the little me. She was quite pretty, really. And that's the me at Ada Foster. I appeared in the shows. Can you find me? Oops, back we go again. I had a rehearsal, believe it or not. Right, try again. I went to college. I crammed years of lost studies and took my O-levels and A-levels, and I went to City of Leicester College of Education. And I'm very pleased that these few pieces of artwork have remained with me to this day. They're 50 years old. That's not bad. And I befriended two Gibraltarian girls, so it must have been destiny that I should meet a certain gentleman. And we were married in 1972. But immigrating to Gibraltar was quite daunting for me. We bought a flat in Marina Court. My astute mother had always advised me, put your money in property. It will always grow in value. And we know that to be true. I had no problem in finding a teaching job and spent most of the next 35 years at Bayside. I think that I have taught about 60% of the male population between the ages of 22 and 57. With my husband Johnny running the Gibraltar Regiment Drama Group over the next 20 years, from 72 to 92, I was able to appear in a myriad of plays. We gained a fair number of awards. The Collection, White Liars, Hunting Pink. We had The Lesson, One Season's King. And then later in the 80s, we produced farces including Marble Arch, Move Over Mrs. Markham, what was the other one? No Sex Please We're British, the original one. Well, after UK, of course. Unfortunately, I've got no photographs of these, so if any of you have any photographs of theatre, do send them to me, please. My musicals included the role of Eliza Doolittle in 1974, My Fair Lady, and my favourite, of course, Fiddler on the Roof. I played twice. 1973, I was Tzeitel, the eldest daughter. And in 1992, under the great lamented Leslie Zamet, I was able to play Golda. And that, of course, is my favourite character for a Jewish girl. In the early 2000s, we took a break from plays. My husband was writing a book, and I was helping children and young adults in courses in acting and theatre craft. And then, of course, in March 2012, 40 years of marriage, he was suddenly taken. It has taken a few years, but I have recently bounced back. I joined White Light with Llévame donde nací. I had a bit part, but it was fun, and I could come back to the stage. I just love it, being in front of an audience, and if I know what I'm doing, hopefully it's well received. Since then, we've also done the Blackadder series in the recent festivals, and of course, I am the new Nursey. So, I hope to do some more of these. We're just waiting for two of our great actors to come back so we can do some more for your pleasure. Here's the drama festival. I think Julian was referring to the left-hand picture where I played a sort of, I don't want it to sound facetious, but like a Russian babushka. And I was so scared I wasn't to move. And I didn't. And everybody's eyes apparently were on me. Good. Because then I am succeeding. Now, this year's drama festival will see something a little bit different. It's a challenge, a very topical play about Alzheimer's disease and dementia. It has the effects on the sufferer and her two girls. So, with that in mind, I haven't quite hung up my clogs. I am going to carry on in theatre with your help, and I look forward to seeing you around. Thank you.